Hello, and welcome to another segment of the Red Cross Meet the Red Cross. My name is Beth Bauer, and I am your host and the CEO of the Capital Area Red Cross Chapter. Today we have 3 volunteers. In our first segment, we will have 2 ladies that were just recently deployed on national disasters. And our second segment, a gentleman who's been on many national disasters, but more recently went to Carrollton, to Carroll County, where we have flooding, a lot of flooding. So today I'd like to introduce to you Arlene Libbert and Ms. Humphreys. Both have been on national disasters. Arlene, her first national disaster in health services, and Gloria, she went on her multiple disasters, but this was her first disaster in Joplin, Missouri, a tornado, and she went as a mental health service provider. So, Gloria, why don't you tell us about what it is to be a mental health services, to be deployed in that field?
Well, the main goal as a mental health provider is, one, you have to be licensed in the state of Missouri or whichever state that you're volunteering for. But the second thing is we really don't do counseling per se, we do crisis intervention. Our main goal when we are deployed is to assess the needs of the people who have been affected by the disaster. And then secondly is to be there as a support for our own volunteers who come from all across the country and all over, sometimes internationally. So that's really, it's kind of a twofold goal as a mental health professional, to be there to take care of not only your clients but also other Red Cross volunteers.
So what is your background, your training?
I'm a licensed clinical social worker, so I've worked a lot with grief and loss. I worked with SIDS, sudden infant death syndrome, for 7 years, so I know a lot about dealing with death and dying, especially unexpected, which in the case of disaster is usually always unexpected, somewhat maybe some warning, but as far as losing everything you own and possibly family members, that's always unexpected. So it kind of goes hand in hand with the training that I've had.
Okay, and could you describe the Joplin tragedy and what you experienced?
It was different for me going to Joplin because it was personal. My mother and father-in-law live in Joplin. I have 8 nieces and nephews and a brother and sister-in-law that live in Joplin. And so that part was different for me. Part of it was good in that they were all okay, physically okay. There was a lot of emotional stuff going on. I don't think you could live in that area and not be personally affected by it somehow. So it was a different experience for me that way. The good thing is I got to stay with my in-laws because their house was intact. So, you know, and a lot of the volunteers that came from all across the country were staying in places that, as we do as a Red Cross volunteer, you never know where you're going to sleep, but that's just part of it, part of the deployment. So I feel very blessed that my family was okay, though.
So did you work, how many people from around the country, how many states do you think that you counseled?
Oh, well, not so many counseling people from around the country because most of them are volunteers from other states. But as far as in Joplin, I was deployed for 2 weeks. I spent probably 10 of those days in the shelter there in Joplin at MSSU, Missouri Southern State University. So I was just amazed and somewhat overwhelmed at how few clients, considering the disaster itself, when you think of 12,000 structures being destroyed and over 800 homes, families losing their homes, that when I was there, I got there the Friday, started working the Friday after this happened on Sunday. There were around 100 people in the shelter, which to me, I've been to a lot of deployments. You might have 200 or 300 people. with not nearly as many deaths or devastation as what happened in Joplin. So I was really overwhelmed with the support that the community gave to those who were left homeless during this time.
Right. Arlene, let's talk a little bit about health services and what exactly is the description of health services, and could you give us a little rundown on that?
Okay, well, for health services, we are available for the health of the volunteers as well as the health of the clients in the shelters or wherever it may be. Might be out on an individual call, but as far as my deployment to Massachusetts, I was available in the shelter in the health services area, and we were sort of in the latter part of the sheltering there because it had been going on for a couple of weeks already before I got there. So everything was pretty smooth, but we still were able to help a lot of clients that needed different types of health services, and some of the volunteers, you know, they have health needs too. So we do what we can.
And what is your background, Arlene?
I'm a registered nurse, and I've worked in just about every field in nursing you could imagine, from ICUs to medical nursing to hospital nursing, office nursing, and I was a family nurse practitioner also working in clinics. So I've got a broad background, but I've been retired for a while and sort of just floating around until I discovered the Red Cross.
Right.
And feel like I wish I had started earlier, because I could have done a lot more, and I hope a lot of people will volunteer. We need nurses very badly.
Right. Nurses and people in mental health field.
Yes.
It's important. I don't think people realize how important those two fields are in the Red Cross because of the shock and not knowing what to do when a disaster happens. And can you explain a little bit more about that in each of your areas?
Well, in mental health, I think when you first meet with a client, it's important that, one, you're empathetic. They need to know that you can kind of somewhat understand what they're going through. But the other part of it is to offer hope, to provide them services that they need, and offer them the opportunity to seek help locally in their community if possible, because we're there for a few weeks and then we're gone. So our main goal is to get them hooked up with local kinds of services that can be there for them for the long haul. And that's what Joplin's going to need, because this isn't going to be restored overnight. This affected so many people and so many families and the community as a whole, that it is going to take years for them to fully recover, but I'm very confident that they will. But they're just going to need a lot of support.
And Arlene?
And, you know, my only experience at being deployed was from Massachusetts, and as I said, you know, we were already down to probably 100 clients in the shelter when I got there, and we actually closed the shelter before I left. So as far as helping them with their medications and things as they went out, client casework does that more than the health services department does. We work more on site at the time, but I also do client casework around the area here, and part of that is in helping them to see beyond the day that happened, to kind of progress, you know,
Right.
to get back on track.
Right. And that's why it's hard for volunteers. It takes a toll on you, because you're seeing all that devastation. And I know when I was at the tornado in Phelps and Pulaski, that it breaks your heart.
Yeah,
so
it
it
does.
is. You get very invested in those people. So what would you say about, I know you do client casework, you just said, in our area, and what would you say about the need for volunteers in the nursing and the and health services and in mental health? how would you look at that when you're looking at our overall volunteer base?
Well, as far as we're concerned, nursing, and I know mental health is the same, we have not very many nurses that we have that are available to even be deployed or even be locally be used, because we've had some pretty good sized tragedies around here too.
Right.
And we always can use them. And you know, people don't have to work full time for the Red Cross. I mean, we volunteer, but we volunteer at our own leisure whenever we are able to, and
right.
if we're not able to go, we can say no.
Right.
So I'm hoping that we will get more volunteers, not just nurses and mental health workers, but all volunteers.
Right.
Well, the need for mental health volunteers, as with nursing, as she said, is always in high demand, partially because and as mental health, we're only deployed for 2 weeks rather than 3 weeks, which most volunteers are deployed because of the mental strain on the volunteers themselves. And, you know, I've been doing this since 1997, and what I've found is I always want to stay longer, but I'm always happy that there's somebody that knows, no, you need to go home, because you do need to take care of yourself as well. But it is the best job you'll ever do as a volunteer, because the rewards are just in knowing that you've been able to support and help, even if it's just one person during your deployment, that you've made a difference in their life and given them hope and a reason to move forward, then you've done your job. And it's very rewarding. And I would recommend any mental health person that has the time and opportunity to get the training they need to do this, because the rewards will far outweigh any sacrifice that you make for your family.
Well, thank you, ladies. We appreciate you being with us today. And we will be right back with Steve Stacey, and he will talk about what's going on in our flooded areas. We have 21 counties, and 11 of those will see flooding. So come back with us after the break.
In America, you are not required to offer food to the hungry or shelter to the homeless. There is no ordinance forcing you to visit the lonely or comfort the infirm. In fact, nowhere in the Constitution does it say you have to provide anything for anybody. Thank you for all you've given. Imagine what more could do.
Thank you for coming back and joining us at Meet the Red Cross. I have Steve Stacey with us. Stacey, excuse me, Steve. Before we start talking about what our volunteers have actually done in Carroll County, can you talk a little bit about how we get prepared for flooding? In the case of our 21 counties, we do have 11 along the river.
Well, a lot of times before a flood even starts or before anything happens, we do a lot of preparatory groundwork and planning for a disaster. And obviously when it talks about the river, we kind of know where the path is, where the flooding is upriver, and we just know whatever is upriver is going to be coming downriver.
Right.
We identify the towns that are going to be a problem. Then we try to locate the facilities in those communities that we can purchase supplies and get some arrangements for some of the fast food or some of the meals that we prepare we can have those prepared locally and then just do the delivery. So that's one of the things. We also try to look at where the floodplains are, where evacuation areas are, what shelters that we may have to set up in the facilities, and what agreements we have prior to a disaster that we've made pre-plans for. So we try to look at all the different aspects of how big it might grow, and if it grows this big or this big, what we're going to do with that, and what our pre-work has done, and what channels that we look at to fulfill our needs.
And what do we do to have pre-planning for a shelter? Tell me about that.
Well, in pre-planning for a shelter, we go around and make arrangements with different churches or different organizations and get agreements for their facility and make sure that it's ADA approved, make sure that the square footage is right, the bathrooms, there's enough bathrooms or showers or whatever there may be, that we record those and then divide it up by the square footage to find out how many clients that shelter will hold. And we do several shelters in one given town. For instance, the west side has a tornado, then we want to go to an area that's closest to the disaster but not involved in the disaster. So that's how we pick out which shelter that we have. And if we have shelters that only need 100 and we need 500, well, we're going to look at one of the shelters that can house a little bit more than that. So those are some criteria that we place. But these are done months and years in advance, not only sheltering, but food service, motel service, stores. We try to get agreements locally with all those stores in preparation of something that happened. We hope that never does.
Right, so that's a vital part of what we do to
Yes.
set up in all the different areas.
Yeah, we could not respond as fast as we respond without that pre-preparation and planning that we do before a disaster happens.
Okay, so now let's talk a little bit what's going on in Carroll County.
Mm-hmm. Carroll County obviously had some flooding issues, and the river has been, most this summer is going to be going up and down. And the levees were full. They were overflowing when we were there in the Carroll County area. The first 2 layers of sandbags were already covered, and so they were just trying to reshore them. The levees have been wet for so long they could not assure where the next break was going to be. So they were just doing patchwork everywhere, and trying to build up the levees as much as they could. And in most cases, very successful. In a few cases, they were not successful.
So what kind of help did the Red Cross provide, or thus far have we provided?
Not a whole lot of homes were involved. There was a lot of farmland involved. And so what we were doing in this job was basically supporting the local workers, and I should say the sandbaggers, those that were trying to protect thousands of acres. And I know 54 there was threatened of going under. Matter of fact, half of it did. And you only had 1 lane travel, and there was other work filling those sandbags, trying to save the road from going completely out of service. But what we did basically was feeding for lunch and supper for those that were in the field doing sandbagging.
Right, and is that something that you've been involved in before?
Yes, yes. The first time I'd really supported sandbagging was way back in 1993 with the mid-Missouri flooding.
Right.
And we did a lot of that and had a lot of sandbag lines, took care of them with water and with meals.
And how do we feed them?
Okay, we have it looks like an red and white ambulance. We call them an ERV, emergency response vehicles, and that is our mode basically to get out into the field wherever the feeding needs to be taking place. So we purchased the meals locally, had them prepared, picked them up, and went out to the field, out to the levees areas as close as we could get, and set up a site either at a farmer's home or something like that, and had feeding on site.
So thus far, one of the secondary levees has breached. I was up in Carrollton yesterday, and one lane, they are down to one lane on 65 coming into that. And I was meeting one of the local bankers, and they're trying to help us raise funds to support the operation. And he did say, and it was an unidentified odor for me. Something I'd never experienced, and he did say it finally had come into the town with the floodwaters, because they've been so high, everything is saturated.
Yes.
And they will be living, like you said, they will be living with us through the end of the summer. And why is it that it will be there so long, that the flood?
Well, there's some real problems up the river, is because, number one, in Montana, North Dakota, South Dakota, they've had unbelievable amounts of rain. It just keeps coming.
Right.
Well, that's not our only problem. The other problem is in the mountain areas, they've had unbelievable winter snowfall. And with the heat also that gets up there, it melts that snow so much faster.
Right.
And so that has really filled the reservoirs up. Now, some have called this a man-made disaster because the Corps engineers they blame didn't release the water earlier. Well, if you remember, we were having real problems along the Mississippi River. Southern Missouri and the Boot Hill area, thousands of acres were flooded out there, and we were really concerned. So a lot of that water was held back when they should have been released, but they couldn't compound the problem on the Mississippi River.
Right.
So they almost had to wait for the Mississippi to go down a little bit before they started releasing water down the Missouri. But by doing that, they had record levels of capacity in the reservoirs. And now they had to release it because their reservoirs are getting waterlogged. They're scared if they would hold, so they had to do some drastic release of water as soon as they could. And we're seeing the consequence of it. And we'll see that most this summer on a scheduled basis. So you're going to see the river going up and going down. And in the mountains, if it gets much colder, much hotter, you're going to see a more faster melt, which isn't good for us. Continued rain up there isn't good for us. Most of the rain that we have here won't affect us that much, except that it will affect the levees that are already saturated. That's where the rainfall here will be a bother to us and could cause some problems of collapses of some of our levees around here.
Right. So you're talking about the reservoirs, you're talking about Devon's Point.
That's one of them. There's about 5 of them along Mississippi, along the Missouri River, all the way up into North Dakota.
Right. And they have said from '93 at Devon's Point, they didn't release it as long, and they were releasing half as much water.
Yes.
So that's kind of an indicator about just how much water is coming down.
Yeah, they have really been inundated up there, and up to the point where their integrity of their facilities are in danger. That's why they can't hold it back any longer. They have to release.
Right. So it is something that is a serious matter, and it will go on for the rest of the summer.
Yes.
So besides the heat that we're currently experiencing.
Terrible, isn't it?
And
how would you like to sandbag in this?
Not something I'd like to do, and being up there yesterday, definitely not something
Yeah.
I'd like to do, but you know, farmland is farmland. So how do we, as the Red Cross, how do we pay to do these operations when we have flooding?
Well, we have, number one, food is the biggest thing on this, because we've just been feeding the sandbag lines. And we get local donations. That helps a lot. And some of the restaurants and stuff donate some of their food. That helps. Right now, we have spent about $5,400 there, and we've fed roughly about 1,500 so far. So that what we can get at a reduced price, we do. What we can get free, we do. What we can't, we pay for.
Right. Right.
Because no matter what happens, sometimes you don't have a whole lot of time to prepare. You find several different facilities that are willing to work with you, and then you give them the meal schedules and go from there.
Right.
And the meals aren't fancy, but they're very refreshing if you've been working on a sandbag line all day.
Right. And as we go from Carroll County into our next counties, the potential for flooding there, what?
Yeah, it's going to go right down the line. We had a break because we were we were at a really bad point. The water was supposed to come up. It actually started coming down. That gives us a breather. Brunswick area is probably the next area that we've seen some real potential that could be happening. And luckily, the water started going down, and that wasn't his problem. But as I said, this is going to be going, even though we think the flooding's all over with down here, it's not. So all summer long, we're going to be seeing, August will be a key point of additional rains or additional faster snow melt is really going to affect this area.
Okay. Well,
So.
I know you're a super volunteer and you've been on multiple, I know you were at the World Trade Center when that
Yes,
happened, so you have been a super volunteer. And as we close here, I would like to say that volunteering with the Red Cross, you can volunteer in so many capacities. We've talked to volunteers that have gone on national deployments today and what's currently going on with our flooding, and it is crucial as the Red Cross for us to do business and to serve our mission is to have volunteers. So, you know, call your local Red Cross, call us at 635-1132 and ask about volunteer opportunities. Come into our office and just ask how you'd like to volunteer. We want you to volunteer the way you want to volunteer. So whether you want to be in the office or you want to be in disaster or you want to serve on the board or a committee, we love you. Love to have volunteers because that's how we do our work and that's how we are able to spend our donor dollars the most wisely that we can do. So again, thank you for joining us today and we will see you on the next segment of Meet the Red Cross.